This is you and Eddie Mair.
Are you done, Steve? Because I've got an email I'd quite like to read to you, but have you got something you want to say?
Why don't you say that tomorrow I've got a meeting with a consultant where all this will be decided. We'll decide whether we wait, whether we act, and if we act now, because of disease in my liver, do I pay for ramucirumab?
Well, if you feel like it, come and join us next Monday. If you want to, because we'd like to know.
Okay.
And this email says, I've started and restarted this message several times because I can't find the words to convey how important the interviews with Steve Hewlett are for me right now. My family were told my mother has advanced bowel cancer last month. We haven't had an oncological appointment yet because we've been awaiting the results of the biopsy, but also we've been battling the serious side effects of the cancer. I think of Steve and his family whenever I travel to and from the hospital. Whenever I think of my mum, when I'm planning how to get the best care for her or to extract information from NHS doctors. I've listened to each interview several times. Being open and honest about cancer and death, as Steve is, diminishes the unknownness of it and the fear of it. It's lessening my pain that he's made me part of his journey.
Well, that brings a tear to my eye.
And now, there's no easy segue. The weather with Jay Wynn.
And it's not easy to segue out of Eddie Mair, Steve Hewlett and Roger Bolton either. Good evening and welcome back to our second debate on the threats faced by British broadcasting, being staged again this year with the help of the RTS and the Media Society for the Steve Hewlett Memorial Appeal. If you missed it live, you can catch up with last night's debate on the BBC and Channel 4 on the RTS YouTube channel. Last night, we had a former Director General of the BBC, a former controller of Radio 4, and the Chief Executive of Channel 4. Tonight, we have another former Director General and the architect of the New York Times digital growth and revival, the chairman of ITV, and a renowned media commentator on the incredible growth of the new streaming channels in the UK and across the world. And indeed, how this could impact on commercial free-to-air channels. Disney Plus, which launched earlier this year, just before the pandemic, already has 75 million subscribers. Netflix, the original streaming gorilla in the room, is about to spend £1 billion, rather $1 billion a year on production in the UK alone. And for the last 3 weekends in a row, Amazon Prime has been dominating the rugby union coverage of the home nations, normally reserved for the BBC and ITV. ITV and its partners has finally been allowed to join the streaming scrap with BritBox. It's had an encouraging start here in the UK. But is it too little and is it too late? And what are the long-term prospects of our biggest commercial channel as it celebrates 60 years of Coronation Street? It's had great viewing figures this year, particularly for news, but its revenues have been battered. And what of 4 and 5? And as the government reviews the licence fee and the future of the BBC, do we need a new definition of commercial public service broadcasting and must carry, must offer, even when it comes to our computers, tablets or phones? John Stapleton will usher in the debate in just a second. And if you could donate to the appeal, that would be great too. Here's how to do it.
You can donate to the Steve Hewlett Memorial Fund by visiting the RTS website at rts.org.uk/Steve Hewlett Fund, or by scanning the QR code shown on screen.
So please give generously. Now to our second debate, this one concentrating on the streamers, that's Netflix, of course, Amazon and Disney, and the impact they're having on public service broadcasting here in the UK. Between them, they're reckoned to have some 25 million subscribers, and they also have lots of money. So how big a threat do they pose? In a moment, too, I'll be talking to a distinguished panel. But first, let's get some expert analysis from Claire Anders.
So since January 2012 and the launch of Netflix, we have seen an inexorable rise in the number of subscribers to SVOD in this country. Around 13 million households subscribe today to Netflix, and the numbers for many other services, the main ones being Disney Plus and Sky Now, are shown on this slide, where you can also see the slightly different service, which is Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime being, as it were, not a direct subscription service per se. So we've seen a tremendous boost to these numbers throughout the lockdown. That has been true, may I say, throughout the world. This has been a time of incredible rise in viewing, particularly of unmatched viewing, and in the case of the UK, during the pandemic, a rise of almost 100% in the aggregate viewing of non-PSB services. The change in TV set usage slide shows that the main impact of the SVODs has been on younger demographics, particularly the under 40s, which have taken to these services with great speed and aplomb, and that has been all true of Disney Plus, which is the most successful commercial launch that this country has ever seen. So we have insatiable demand for very high quality drama. As shown in this slide, there has been a massive change in the relative performance of PSB budgets against those of SVODs. Netflix has overwhelmed the abilities of any PSB, and indeed the PSB and that of the entire production sector. That has been a very, very powerful force, which has caused many PSBs to reduce the number of original commissions they do in drama and to struggle to meet the demands of audiences for very fresh material. It has also placed the spotlight relentlessly on the value of new material, taking it away from repeats, any other form of reuse of material. It has been a race to the top for drama for the last decade, and indeed, one could say that has been true for actually 15 years. So where are we now? Well, the SVOD investments into the UK have become extraordinarily substantial. Netflix is increasing its investment to $1 billion in the UK next year. That is equivalent to what Sky spends after a decade of marked increase in activity. It is an overwhelming avalanche of interest placed upon UK companies by the SVOD services, and coming on top of an extraordinary focus on drama productions for the PSBs as well. The impact of that has been pretty difficult for the PSBs to deal with, because above all, we're looking at a global inflation in the value of every single part of the production chain, from central actors, script writers, to location elements such as production studios. Companies that are vertically integrated have fared much better than others. It has been a struggle for all public service broadcasters to see these budgets that have risen from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 10 million per hour across the system, and indeed to understand the importance that the audiences place on these matters, on this kind of production. But the fact is that public service broadcasters are there to meet a huge range of demand, of which drama viewing never tops more than 20% of all aggregate viewing. But the pressure on drama is one that raises fundamental questions about the number of original dramas that any public service broadcaster can hope to land in this time of extraordinary investment. Thank you.
Well, joining me now is Sir Peter Bazalgette, Chairman of ITV, Mark Thompson, a former Director General of the BBC and until recently President and Chief Executive of the New York Times, and Janine Gibson, Assistant Editor of the Financial Times and for many moons now a keen media observer here in the UK. Thank you all very much indeed for joining me. You've heard the analysis there from Claire. First and foremost, Peter, your reaction to it?
Well, she came up with a lot of statistics and I can confirm they're accurate. And that's a good start. But actually, there are some nuances in what she said that I would add to her presentation. One is that the streamers are very much frenemies where traditional UK broadcasters are concerned, because they're very important customers for our content companies, our production companies. In fact, ITV Studios, which pre-COVID had a turnover of about 1.8 billion pounds, in the last 12 months, it's, I think, second biggest customer after ITV Channels is indeed Netflix. Very important both here in the UK and especially in the States. I think the other point I'd make, and it's picking up on something Claire said, just to expand it, is that there's a great deal of difference between Netflix and Amazon. Netflix is a service, Amazon is a platform. The real threat to British broadcasters is the supranational monopolies that own platforms that wish to be the aggregators of content of the future, and how we can get our signal and our programs distributed on a fair, prominent basis with reasonable returns in the future. That's the big issue. That's not an issue with Netflix, but it is an issue with Amazon. The last point I'd make is that her graphs were all about money. So Netflix, to its credit, spending £1 billion on content in the UK in this 12 months, far fewer hours because of course it's mostly drama. And so it's very important, I think, to put a graph up as well that shows hours produced. And then you see how dominant or not dominant the streamers are in terms of production. At the moment, everybody's quoting money. The hours that British broadcasters produce compares to the streamers, massively more hours. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, thanks very much indeed. Mark, if I could turn to you, they're customers to some extent of ITV, but also they're a threat to you. And that threat, it takes in the BBC as well, doesn't it, Mark? Because they are pinching viewers in fairly significant numbers off the BBC.
Sure. I mean, look, firstly, we should celebrate something. There's a piece of good news in the middle of all of this, which is that capital is pouring into the UK and supporting British talent, British production, and all the rest of it in a way which wasn't true 5 or 10 years ago. And so there's a very positive side to this in some ways, which is that more pieces are being made. All of the craft industries in the UK are at least potentially, it's been a difficult year with COVID, but are thriving because of the capital that's arriving. I think the problem is basically that both the capital, this is essentially venture capital money kind of focused on Silicon Valley and on big digital visions. It's paying for Elon Musk's adventures, and it's paying for Reed Hastings and co. And Disney has got enough clout to get also enough capital to compete, as Claire said very effectively, with Disney Plus. And the control, both the control of who's got this money and who can decide where it gets spent, and exactly as Peter says, the control of who's got the algorithms and the technology for the major platforms. Both of these things are happening outside the country, and the decisions that have been taken reflect that. This is the UK for the globe, and somebody looking at the UK from the outside could be forgiven for thinking everything in the UK either happens in Buckingham Palace or Hogwarts, or in places like Bly Manor, the kind of haunted house we're all watching at the moment. And it's a version of the UK which leaves about 98% of the real UK out. And so to me, the real issue is partly loss of audiences, of course, because so much great British content is no longer available on the traditional platforms. It's also who's going to tell the stories of people who actually live in this country in 2020 and 21. And that was traditionally the public service broadcasters. But my view, and I've talked about this publicly, is neither the policymakers nor the regulator Ofcom have really ever asked themselves big questions about how you recapitalise British broadcasting with British commissioning and British choices. And as a result, the broadcasters are basically still all in kind of boxes from the analog world, and their own digital experiments are simply not scaled yet at a level which can compete, especially for younger audiences. So to me, there's a really big public policy question here about how do you actually take the present and the future seriously, and how do you have to reorganise to meet it?
We'll go into that in detail a little bit later on if I could, Mark. Thank you very much, Janine, first of all, I'm old enough to remember the days when people said that television would kill off radio completely. Well, radio's still there. Is there a danger that we're perhaps overstating this, getting a bit too excited about it? Or is it a real threat to the likes of the BBC and Peter's ITV?
Obviously both is the answer to that. Firstly, and I have seen this in the news industry at first hand, but television is clearly facing its sort of moment of digital disruption in that they thought they were facing as young people started to drift off and have attention issues to the main television brands. But you only really see it when the money starts to tip. So UK broadcasters, as Mark has very nicely articulated, are really going to feel the squeeze now as impact, inevitably your programs become either sort of very big semi-global productions, see The Crown or so on, or very small and regional. And this has absolutely happened in news. You can
You can always get funding for a massive, big investigation that eventually becomes a feature film, and you can always get enough revenue to do very hyperlocal stuff, e.g., next door level stuff. But the middle is what gets squeezed. So there is a massive creative challenge for the UK industry, and I couldn't agree with Mark more about the public policy, but we'll come on to that. The thing I think we're missing so far is that Netflix and Amazon and Disney, to a certain extent, are now going to face what we know as tech company problems, which means it's not straightforward plain sailing for them either. Netflix, is starting to plateau. If you're a Netflix shareholder, you're going, where's my next 26 million coming from? They only grew 2.2 in the last quarter compared to 26 million in the first 2 quarters of this year. And that is during peak Netflix year. There's not going to be another year where we're all, please God, where we're all locked in watching box sets. We all pretty much now feel like we've finished Netflix, don't we? And where's the restock? So there is a problem there.
Okay.
They have issues with content servicing, same as in analog or early digital. We had problems with, who's higher up the dial. They have problems with an over dependency on algorithm, or what I like to call everyone needs an editor. We see the same thing over and over, and it doesn't really speak to us. And they have problems with marquee space. You can basically sell one thing a week on Netflix, and that if you're not going to watch the teenager chess program, you're just not going to watch it. So Disney has all its other revenues have collapsed, so they don't have suddenly the readiness to pour billions in. So it's not a done deal, would be my contention.
Well, let's just talk about this wretched year we've all experienced, and kick off with you, if I may, Peter. I mean, what impact has the pandemic had on all of this? I mean, I suppose in the sense, good news in that more and more people are watching television, particularly news, and it's encouraging they turn to British news at the BBC and ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. But at the same time, it's cost us all a lot of money, hasn't it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right about both of those things, John. It's been, we don't know, we haven't finished the calendar year yet, but it looks as though this year will be worse than the credit crunch year of 2009 for commercial broadcasting. And if it is, that will make it the worst year in the history of ITV since it's set up in commercial television in 1955. The consensus amongst analysts is between 10 and 15% down for the year, because we've had very high ratings, but we have had fewer advertisements to show. But the advertising market's coming back quite strongly towards the end of the year. It's shown, it's hurried, as many of these things do. It's very, very much speeded up the trend towards catch up and streaming individual viewing decisions, so that I think live viewing is down to 58%. That is viewers of the schedule as opposed to viewers of, and it was, even 18 months ago, it was about 70%. So that's speeded up. And if you saw on Claire Ender's graph, it speeded up the diaspora of people to streaming, particularly in a slightly older age group than before, in the sort of early middle age, 32 to 45 group, which you saw a -2, -3 on, which you wouldn't have seen before. So it has speeded things up. But let's come back to the positives, John. One thing, anybody who was not entirely distracted by the COVID emergency and by Brexit, and in government, there may be few people who are undistracted, but for those who were able to look at anything else, it has reminded a whole group of people of the value of broadcasting with a public purpose, the public good of broadcasting. Not just that you need a trusted and reliable news source, John, something you gave your life to, your entire career was about that, trusted and independent journalism, which is what makes a democracy tick. Brackets, look at what's going on in the States right now. But also getting out key government messages in emergency, getting them out on not just the internet, but getting them out on DTT as well. If all TV is distributed on the internet in 10 years' time, and the internet is compromised because the next world war will be a digital one, it's not going to be a nuclear war, then any country will be mad to only have one form of distribution of content. So national resilience comes in, and then national values, because you continue to get the production of the soap operas and other programs that reflect back to ourselves what our conversation is, what our values are. So it goes all down the way. So it underlined something Mark said earlier, that these things are important, but undervalued in government. So I know you'll probably come on to the policy agenda for PSB later in this conversation, but it's had tremendously sharpened up that debate, I feel.
Well, let's address it right now, because I'm just wondering what you, Mark, as a former Director General of the BBC and someone, of course, who's worked at Channel 4, thought when you heard the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, say we have to ask some fundamental questions about public service broadcasting. We have to ask whether we need it at all. What were your thoughts? And I'll come back to you for that as well, Peter, in a minute, and Janine. But first of all, Mark.
Mr. Dowden's also now got a group of the great and good, actually, but interesting group of people to look at all these questions. It feels like the record is stuck. I mean, this is sort of, you know, when I was a kid at the BBC, Mrs. Thatcher got Professor Peacock to do a study of the future of public service broadcasting. And weirdly, you know, whenever, you know, we're now dealing with a fundamental revolution in media. It's very straightforward, and it requires capital, it requires imagination, it requires risk taking. And it feels like we've gone over and got an old LP out, putting the needle on to we'll meet again sort of thing. It's so...
Just pause your moment, Mark. At the same time, you know, an Ofcom report out last week said, yes, okay, still, you know, public service broadcasting demands the lion's share of the audience, but only something just over 50% of people any longer have any faith or trust in the BBC. They don't see it as impartial anymore. I mean, the picture is changing, and changing not necessarily in favour of public service broadcasting. We don't have any divine right to broadcast, do we?
I tell you, behind the scenes, Ofcom officials will tell you they know the scale of the challenge and they know what's required in terms of fundamental rethinking. What they've said to me is it's pointless with this government. That given the current political setup and the current disposition in the House of Commons and the rest of it, trying to go to the fundamentals and ask the fundamental questions is a non-starter. And we're still in a world where, in many ways, much of the agenda has been set by people from the UK newspaper world, which is even more existentially challenged and kind of locked in old thinking than the broadcasters. And you can
Janine, I mean, you have your
the floating of Charles Moore and of Paul Dacre to lead. So the Ofcom, you know, which has got a very big role in this, the suggestion that Paul Dacre should become chair of Ofcom. I know Paul quite well, and I've got time for him. But the idea that Paul is the right person in a sense to go, if you like, so, you know, kind of, you know, head to head with Reed Hastings of Netflix to kind of figure out what in that chess game, the global chess game of streaming, that Paul is has got the kind of background, the kind of expertise, the kind of history of innovation, all the rest of it to start giving, you know, the UK some big thoughts about the future. So I think we've got to be realistic about the politics of the moment, which it seems to me are fundamentally more about fighting the last war on public service broadcasting and imagining that broadcasting is a kind of controlled system where the big issue is how big should the BBC be relative to the other players in that system, rather than seeing that the totality of the UK broadcasting is part of a global competition market, and everyone in the UK, including the BBC, is a minnow globally, and the BBC is the only UK media brand really which has got global potential.
Okay, they're failing to see the big picture, Janine, according to Mark. You have your ear to the ground in Westminster as well as in the media. Do you get the impression, as Mark seems to be suggesting, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, that there are people in this government who seem hell-bent on getting at public service broadcasting?
Well, there's one fewer than there was because he had to resign a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, that's something. Two fewer.
That will help matters, will it?
Well, I think he probably was the most single-minded in his pursuit, from what you hear and from the conversations I've had. One hardly dares speak for him, but and also I think that some of the things that Mark just referenced were part of that trap that the industry and particularly the BBC has fallen into. You know, Charles Moore. I fell into that trap, but I do not think Charles Moore was ever going to be the chairman of the BBC. I do not think for one second that Paul Dacre has ever really seriously considered being the chair of Ofcom. But I think it's, and he definitely doesn't intend to. Yeah, and I suspect these things are dropped out to send us all off down a chase, and we all, unfortunately, are only too willing. It's distracting. There's a lot of bad news around. The trust in the BBC thing, I think, is really interesting because it comes down to that fundamental thing of the BBC is two broadcasting organisations, one of which puts Strictly on Saturday night and lives and dies by whether EastEnders audiences and whether they can build a drama into Shoulder Peak, and it really, really matters how many touch points you have with an audience across the week. All of which I have felt for some years the BBC was doing as well, if not much better than it has done for the 20 years I've been covering media. But the crisis of faith in BBC News, which has been absolutely exploited by successive governments now, massively undermines its revenue model and becomes a perpetuating problem. When I started out, it used to be that it only mattered what the ratings were on Saturday night, and BBC News didn't have to break a story or really do anything much other than not cause the Director General to have to resign. And it is completely the opposite now.
I just raise this briefly because it's in the papers every day, and it'd be remiss of me not to mention it. But let me ask both Peter and Mark whether you think on this question of trust and faith in the BBC and indeed public service broadcasters generally, whether we think the allegations surrounding Martin Bashir at the moment, in relation to his interview with Princess Diana, will have any impact on that faith, which is still there amongst a considerable number of people, both for ITV and for BBC.
Well, look, I'll go in very quickly there. The newsman here is Mark, and he ran many bits of BBC News in the year, so I think his view will be very important. But just to say very quickly, you get problems from time to time, problems of trust, problems of probity. The important thing is, do you root them out, inquire into them honestly, and sort them out? This was 25 years ago, but it matters for reputation. So the inquiry is very, very important. And I'm pleased to see it's wide enough. It seemed to be quite narrow the first time round. Did a particular false bank statement persuade somebody to give an interview? That's a very narrow inquiry when you should be asking, should you make up such props at all? So I think it's going to be broad. I think it'll be healthy. But Mark, I wonder what you think.
Yeah, look, I think Davie's done the right thing in getting a properly independent, obviously a judge of great experience and probity, and to put this thing to bed with a proper inquiry. I have no idea what that inquiry is going to conclude after it's looked at the evidence, and then we better wait till then. I want to say though that although obviously that's an amazing talking point and it's got a lot of media coverage, I think honestly the root of the crisis of confidence in BBC News is essentially around a set of views about whether or not historically in recent years, or maybe to this day, the BBC is biased to the left, and in particular was anti-European in a way which was intended to get the vote to leave the EU in 2016 to go the other way, which is that's a very particular conservative perspective of the BBC, but it is driving quite a lot of the noise in the papers, and it's driving quite a lot of political sentiment. What I want to say, though, just going back to my earlier remarks, it's really important to say I'm not particularly pessimistic about the BBC and this government. I think, for the reasons Janine says, in reality, I don't think we're going to see, just as it were, highly negative figures necessarily actually running these institutions like the BBC itself as chair or Ofcom. Nor do I think a government which is trying to fight back in terms of the US economy, the UK economy, and in terms of Brexit, is it likely to actually find in the end that just kind of in quotes destroying or completely cramping the BBC style is a particularly high government priority. So I'm not particularly pessimistic. The point I was really trying to make essentially was around how they're thinking about the PSB review, and the fact that I think we're dealing with a kind of global three-dimensional chess, and I think they're getting out the noughts and crosses board yet again and asking themselves questions which are essentially about a lost world, a world where UK broadcasting could be looked at discreetly, and where and then maybe look at the broadcasters and newspapers in relation to news, and try and look at traditional market impact. I mean, as people here may know, in 2007-8, we tried to launch a global version of iPlayer involving ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, partly because I'd seen Reed Hastings and knew what he had planned for Netflix and thought it was important that there was a kind of, it would never have been as big as Netflix, but a kind of a big British player there, and UK competition authorities who again were looking for the narrow focus of UK television distribution said, no, it'll distort competition.
If I may, can I just...
A bigger fish to fry than that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to...
Peter, go on.
Apology. May I just come back on the trust point, which was your question?
Yeah.
Because it's very important. And you were questioning the reasons for a possible erosion of trust. And the internet world is a very, very different world. It makes reliable news more important than it was before the internet world, but it makes it more difficult. So what's happening in America at the moment during this election campaign and its aftermath is that Trump supporters who watch Fox News are now thinking Fox News is not a reliable service because it's not extreme enough in their views, and they're deserting that for what's it called, One Network, isn't it? And also then for Parler and Rumble, and deserting Twitter for Parler and Rumble. These are services on the internet, or largely on the internet, which are more extreme. So what we're living in is the world of confirmation bias. And it's a new world, and it's one we haven't come to grips with yet. So just to short circuit it, one of the critical things for trusted and reliable news produced by public service broadcasters, which is a public good that we need, is that they, the BBC, our own ITV news service, and so on, have got to get into routinely describing how we make the news, why you can trust it, how we train our journalists, what our ethics are. We've always assumed people know that. You ask any 18-year-old on the street, they've no idea. They need to know that we are reliable. And if you go to our site, even occasionally, you can test whether a story is true. This is very, very important.
And this is, by the way, something that the much maligned newspaper industry had to come to terms with, 10, 15 years ago now, and forced completely different ways of telling stories much more transparently. And although clearly we still have a lot of issues with huge swathes of the press, we publish a lot of evidence behind our stories. We open up about how we do our reporting, and that is part of the process of doing reporting now. And it's been forced upon us, but it's very good discipline. It is. I agree with Baz entirely.
Let's move this on a bit, because I want to talk to Peter, if I can briefly, about how, in the face of this competition, however ferocious as it is, organisations like ITV survive. And I take no joy in relating these figures, Peter, because as you know, I work for ITV as well as BBC. I worked for ITV for 25 years. But according to what I read, advertising was down by 43% in the second quarter. Overall down by about, as you say, between 15 and 20%. Share price has fallen. You're no longer in the FTSE 100. Market value has fallen by 40%. I could go on, but it doesn't make good reading. And it does beg the question, can you survive all this, Peter? Yeah,
actually, your ITV is a remarkably resilient company that remains profitable, that has got very well controlled debt. We didn't go and ask for any government money this year. And the scary numbers you quoted in advertising, as you quite rightly say, over the year, it isn't going to be quite so scary, though it's pretty bad news. But no, the key to this, and we had Mark there talking to our troops only recently, for which many thanks, Mark. It was a really valuable session, so they told me. We have to modernise, and all companies whose modernisation involves eating their own lunch, that is, creating services that take viewers away from the main schedule into the streaming universe, which we have to do to survive. Eating our lunch is one of the most difficult things, and both ITV and BBC are late modernising. We are late doing it, and we have a lot of ground to make up. But just to make one more point about that, it's not all about, paid streaming services, which is what, in a sense, that opening presentation was about, and it was interesting. BritBox, of course, we should have a Spotify model where people can either have free content, ad-supported, or pay. And we have ITV Hub Plus, where you can watch the schedule without ads, and we have BritBox. But the key service for us, as it is for NBC with their service Peacock, is growing our ad-supported streaming services. And it's the same for BBC iPlayer, which Mark actually set up. And it's the same for Channel 4 with All 4. And that's where we have to put the major part of our resources growing it in future. It's a huge opportunity. And it shows that there's life in the old dog yet, I can assure you.
And they do so when they attempt that, Janine. They do so not on a level playing field, do they? Because the BBC and public service broadcasters have a whole set of rules, regulations, and obligations to fulfil, whereas the streamers simply don't. And that's in many ways unfair competition. I'd like to examine in the next couple of minutes what we all think we should do about that. You recognise that difference, though, Janine, I'm sure.
Yes, but I also think yes, but the rules and the culture in which these organisations have sprung up have created a huge player advantage for them as well. Netflix, Disney, Hulu. There is a panoply of streaming services, most of which will not survive, as Claire Ender's analysis showed. People are not. There is a ceiling for how many things people will subscribe to. And as HBO will have learnt this month, as you guys all taught me when I started out in media, a one-hit show can do an awful lot and breed another hit show and another hit show. And if you haven't got The Undoing this month, well, you haven't got The Undoing this month. And somebody will pay $5.99 for it and then move on. It is a problem for ITV as it looks at, and the others at BritBox and so on, because you're coming from way behind to grow your service. But if you have the hit show, you can move the money. You've just got to keep it, I think.
Nevertheless, Mark, if I may put this to you, Dame Carolyn McCall, of course, from ITV, says that PSBs may cease to exist in the present form unless they're given better slots on smart TV menus. Is she overstating the case, or is there something in that?
Well, I mean, if we talk about if you like, the kind of practicalities of this, the big platforms are under some political and regulatory pressure now in many jurisdictions. US actually, and I think a Biden administration will press that. EU, Australia, and so on. And I think the idea that there might be, as it were, regulatory deals to be done about due provenance for, let's call it, local content and local content providers. Google already voluntarily is doing some stuff with its algorithm to, for example, favor local news sources in European countries, something which has actually hit the New York Times' audiences sometimes in some European countries. But I think the idea of as it were, getting either voluntarily or through some kind of regulatory process to a point where traditional players in European countries and in the UK can in various ways get kind of notice. I mean, where you appear in a list of search answers, or where you appear in a set-top box and the rest of it really matters. I think that's feasible. What I want to say is that, I mean, this is an experience from the New York Times. I think that the kind of crown jewels of great reputations, of great pre-existing hit shows which people love, and for brands like the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, I think is immense, and I think sometimes underestimated by the people who are running those organizations. I mean, we at the Times, we launched the podcast, a daily podcast a few years ago, which very quickly, the combination of the New York Times brand and the way it was done, so it's one of the most important news programs of any kind in the US, and 2/3 of the audience are 40 and under, and it's had the effect of introducing the entirely new generation of news users in America and around the world to the New York Times and what it stands for. And I think the idea you've actually got more than you think you have. It's quite often, if you're in a legacy organization, it's like you can see all the problems with being a legacy organization, but you forget the advantages. And Janine, I think, is 100% right and the great thing about legacy brands is if they've got a history of hit making and a history of giving you moments of pleasure and comfort and all the rest of it, you can build on that in your programming. Netflix did that essentially early on by buying big libraries and borrowing the reputation of shows like Friends to achieve the same result. But those are borrowed clothes. ITV, Channel 4 and the BBC have got so many great stars and brands of its own. And I think there's more about how do you rebuild and refound these organizations in this kind of non-linear world. And some of that, of course, will help. If you can get a leg up because you can badger somebody into giving you better prominence, that's great. But I think a lot of the value is actually in the IP, in the shows.
Let me throw this one across all three of you. Given the amount of money they've got, because I've got to come back to this. I mean, they've got eye-watering amounts of money. £750 million being spent in the UK alone this year. There's talk about $15 million an hour on certain productions. Given this eye-watering amount of dosh they have in their hands, at the end of the day, are we going to have to face the fact that perhaps we have to change the way in which public service broadcasting is funded, and we're going to go to some kind of subscription system? Janine, first of all.
I mean, they are eye-watering amounts of money, but I just, the things that people are watching this month or last month, Bake Off, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, a Gogglebox, and a daily news briefing. That's the most lo-fi thing you've ever seen, because those are the things that people are watching that matter to them right now. They feel real and homely and intimate and British, and they're not even new. That might be part of it. They've all been around forever. I accept the news briefings are a bit new, but not really. And I don't think the thing that's made any of those things work and make everybody tune into them obsessively is really obscene amounts of money. I think there's routine, there's habit, there's familiarity, and there's sort of connection. But Amazon Prime can't even do a weekly magazine show about cars that was already a hit. There are things about broadcasting that you can't throw money at.
Sorry to press you on. We're running short of time.
Yeah. You asked the funding question, didn't you? The funding question.
I'm sorry?
You asked the funding question. Let me address it.
All right, go on then.
I'll address it. So let's remember that a lot of PSB is not funded by the license fee because it's advertiser funded. And as far as ITV and Channel 4 are concerned, certainly ITV, its mass simultaneous audience is a thing of enormous value because there's nowhere else you can do it. You can't get a whole lot of people in one place at one time. And even at half its current audience, it would still be of huge value. So the advertising underpin of PSB, as long as prominence is delivered, as Mark was talking about earlier, which is a principle that was set out in the 2003 Communications Act. It just needs updating. It's not complicated. As long as that's delivered, that's fine. To your question about the BBC, my view is very clear on the BBC. I think it's absolutely right in 7 years' time to have a debate about how the BBC is funded. Should it be from direct taxation? Should it be a tax on your house, a media tax? Should it be a continuation of the license fee? But there's one thing I am clear on. It should not be a voluntary subscription. If, as a country, we think public service broadcasting delivers a public good, we should have the will, as a people, to back a system that puts funds into the BBC part of it. So, whatever the outcome of that debate, the BBC should have hypothecated funding.
And who should be the BBC chair in those circumstances, do you think?
Did I hear you offer a satirically Kelvin Mackenzie earlier, John? Did I hear you mention him?
His name was in the ring at one stage, wasn't it?
It was.
Well, he put it in. There is a serious point, though. There is a serious point about that. The government, by making it very clear who they want to be the chairman of the BBC, have queered the pitch, and someone who we might all think would be very good at it, e.g. Baz, might not. If I was him, I wouldn't apply. I know that Rishi's former boss is going to get it, and it is not great.
A bit difficult for Baz to answer that in his present position, but
well, I'm saying for
what do you Baz?
I think Mark ought to be asked to talk at this point.
Very diplomatic. Very diplomatic.
Yeah. So look, here's what I think. I mean, I tell you, something we did at the New York Times is, I mean, half the board are digital entrepreneurs and engineers and digital marketing people. I mean, we got specialists. It's a much younger board than it used to be, and it's some significant figures. One of our board members went on to become chief executive of Uber. There's a board member at the Times who ran Expedia and is now the CEO of GoDaddy. So you've got real digital players who understand how this world works. They don't have to be chair necessarily, and there's politics and the stakeholders of these big broadcasters means goodness knows who should be chair. But the idea that you want digital expertise, I think, look, if the broadcasters put investment in content first and worried about schedules second, the schedules which increasingly appeal to older people, if you make great content, somebody else can curate a schedule out of great content. They could make the you'd make the.
They're spending less and less. I'm sorry to interrupt. They're spending less and less. I can't find the figure now. But what broadcasters have spent on programs has dropped dramatically in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, not that dramatically. You've gone to currently about 2.6 billion, and it's down from a peak of about 3 billion.
So here's the thing. I think that you can spend the money you've got in a way more efficiently. I think you need to spend a lot more on digital product. I mean, at the New York Times newsroom of 1,700 people, 800 people in engineering. I mean, you about one engineer for every 2 journalists. I mean, and I think the idea that digital product and data science are more and more important and actually requires investment. I mean, this is building a factory to make electric cars. You can't start with a kind of internal combustion factory and hope you're going to kind of wing it by building a little shed on the side. It's like a new factory, and it does need capital. And I think borrowing the money, persuading investors with a vision that there's a good reason for positive investment in these great brands. I think if you've got the right digital strategy, you can make the money you've got go further and get a better result, honestly. But I think there's no way this is going to happen in any European country without significant fresh investment.
Let me just change the subject slightly, if I may, because everyone says the important thing is young people under the age of 35 or so. Median age of audiences for public broadcasters is now 60 plus. More and more young people are watching videos, watching streaming services. Time spent watching mainstream TV is 40% down in the last 4 years. They are important because they're the future, as no one cares about my generation anyway, particularly. What are you going to do? Janine, what can broadcasters do to get more of them back on, if you'll forgive the pun, back on stream?
Well, now this is where Mark's point was incredibly important. The one engineer for every 2 journalists point about the New York Times. My kids absolutely watch public service broadcasting all the time. They just don't watch it on public service channels. They think that Friday Night Dinner and Bake Off and a whole bunch of other shows are Netflix shows because that's where they watch them, because that's the user experience that is intuitive to them and easy, and then services another like this. They watch a huge amount of British television that has cost an enormous amount of money and had fantastic local talent poured into it, but they think they're from Netflix. And that is that's not
the exception.
They couldn't care less what the positioning is on the smart TV. If they want to find it, they'll find it, and they don't really understand what a TV guide is. And this is data, not anecdote. But they definitely only learn about TV brands through the title screen at the end of the show, if that. They're viewing it through the thing that has the best user experience, which is why you need engineers and product people, not necessarily EPG positioning.
Just for the record, John, we do very much care that we make programs that appeal to you. I always think of you at our meeting. Number one in our priorities. But can I just add something about, because you
put more football on in that case. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I've got to put more football on. I've got to be able to afford the rights, which is a different thing. But if you wouldn't mind putting your hand in your pocket, John, we might be able to, between us,
taking an old LP off.
Look, can I just add something about younger viewers, because it's a very important point you raised. Yes, of course, there's been a marked diaspora of younger viewers from the schedule to the streaming world. Although, of course, it's not all doom and gloom. The opening programme of I'm a Celebrity, which consolidated at 14 million, had a 76% share, or 75 or 76% share of the nation's 16 to 25-year-olds. So, we can still attract younger viewers. But the thing is, we have got to put massively more resources into our streaming services, iPlayer, Hub, and all 4. And all of us have said this publicly now, and we need to bespoke commission programs for those services that will never be seen on the schedule, and they will be directly appealing to younger viewers, and that's what we've got to do, and we're going to do it.
So what of Sharon White of Opcon's suggestion that BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5 should all work together to create, in effect, a British Netflix? I mean, I know we've got Britbacks, but hollow laugh at this point. Who's going to talk about? Mark, you explain about kangaroo.
Kangaroo.
That was the right strategy. Conceivably, might still be the strategy, but it should have happened 13 years ago, and that was the plan. I mean, the plan. iPlayer was only part of the plan. The other half was collaboration. And collaboration famously between public broadcasters, just like with newspapers, is kind of hedgehogs mating. I mean, it's a delicate, painful process, but we were there actually in terms of agreeing how it was going to work and with the right kind of governance. And the same governance, by the way, worked for Freeview and FreeSat and UView. And the idea of getting different combinations of the industry together to achieve digital switchover worked very well. There should have been a global platform solution using the same kind of good relations and the same kind of partnership. I mean, look, honestly, the big question is who is going to provide the capital so you can compete with Reed Hastings and with Disney and all the rest of it, and with Amazon. And until you can answer that, so how do you think about this? And to what extent do you want this to be a domestic play? If it becomes a domestic play and therefore it's a voluntary subscription model, how does the BBC fit into that? What does that tell you? Is that possible alongside the BBC? Does this become part of your vision for what replaces the universal license fee? Like Peter, I think you stop the universal license fee and make the BBC a subscription service, and you discover it's not the BBC. It might be a successful thing, but it's not the universal BBC. It's like saying the NHS is going to now be a voluntary subscription service. It just doesn't work with the concept in a way. But I think that to me is what I would say, rather than sort of, what seems to be the terms of reference of the Secretary of State's PSB panel. Those are the kind of questions I think the UK should be asking itself.
And Janine,
I think it's slightly the wrong question. I think, in the same way that Sharon White now at John Lewis is, selling off all her expensive real estate and making it into apartment buildings. And focusing on selling the products directly to the user digitally. I don't think that the challenge for UK broadcasters is to build a new home. I think that the challenge for them is to take what they really do know how to do, making brilliant programs that connect with the British public, and then make it as easy as possible for the British public to find them, without going, I've spent a lot of time building a lovely new shop over here that you should come and visit. I just think that time is gone. But a hit program, as discussed earlier, will find its audience and give you other opportunities from program to program to program.
We're in the territory of concluding thoughts, Janine and gentlemen both. I'll ask you this, kick off with you, if I may, Peter. I mean, there's no, to quote Boris, there's no cavalry coming over the hillside to rescue you all, is there? So what for you is the future? What are the answers? Where should we go from here?
Right. So the sort of topic of this whole debate was the streamers, and are they good or bad news? Are they a threat? They're a fact. They are fantastically important, and they're a great customer of production companies in this country, as Mark said. So that's great. It's the platforms we need to look at, not the individual streaming services. The platforms are owned by supranational monopolies who don't give a fig about a particular country. They need to be regulated just as the whole internet needs to be regulated. And that is the challenge for liberal democracies at the moment. How do you regulate the internet? As far as broadcasting itself is concerned, we need to have the faith to say we want a system of public service broadcasting. We like the plurality. We like some of it publicly funded via the license fee or whatever system it is. We like some of it funded by advertising. And speaking for ITV, we own a precious asset called simultaneous advertising. Mark said, where is the capital going to come to invest in it? In our case, of course, we have shareholders. It's going to come from that, because that is a pot of gold that continues to deliver the money we are going to use to modernize our company and be part of the story in the future.
All right, in a minute or so, Mark, your last words on the subject.
I think, let's start with audiences and content. I mean, I think that reflecting the real lives of people across the country. The UK in all its kind of diversity, making as far as you can your content as close as you can to the audience. If you want a younger audience, younger writers, younger producers, younger decision makers, more diverse decision makers. So in other words, beginning to live, kind of walk the walk with your talk of truly reflecting the country, and trying to develop the kind of creative relationships with makers, which brings loyalty. I mean, so this is bravery around difficult subjects, bravery about stuff that won't travel and which is distinctive and unique, trying to find a new generation of writers and other artists to kind of bring the true UK of today to sharp focus. That to me is the heart of it, is like a creative vision. And then what I think, I know what Janine means when she says, you can't be, it's probably too late to create, in quotes, a home. I think trying to figure out, how do you get attribution? How do you connect the thing you've made and your revenue streams with the audience? So the audience knows, the advertiser knows, the subscriber knows, that people know where it's come from, its kind of provenance is really important. In the context of the Times, New York Times, we thought we had to be a destination. We had to have enough of an experience of the Times, which is why we threw money into engineering, that people would know the content wasn't just Story X on Facebook or Google, it was from the New York Times. There may be other solutions, and there may be potentially solutions that can be worked out with the platforms, but attribution, so people know it's an ITV show, they know what Channel 4 stands for as a brand, and then, as Peter says, new forms of revenue, new revenue streams. Okay. And for the BBC, honestly, making the case for a national broadcaster for a post-Brexit UK as a sovereign country which needs a national voice, and winning that political battle, no matter how hard it is.
Last word to you, Janine.
Oh God. Well, I suppose as I think as I've tried to be saying, I don't think the dice is quite as loaded as we might fear. There are everybody's got challenges. We're not facing a creative crisis. Program making is fantastic. The viewer's not suffering as long as the viewer is affluent enough to afford a couple of subscriptions. And frankly, since Sky launched, that's always been the case. My concern is for news. I'm a journalist. My concern is for news, the thing that really matters, the thing that is in most peril and at threat. And we've got 2 news channels apparently launching next year, but they are not what we would culturally know as news in this country. They are going to be much closer to the Fox model. And we know what that does. So if I'm ambiguous about whether there should be a subscription or a tax or a combination of both for public service broadcasting. But if something has to be funded by every member or every citizen of the country, then I think it's news.
Well, no surprise to know, Janine, I'd certainly back that. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Thank you to you, Janine, for your very, very lively contribution. I hope you folks at home watching this enjoyed it too. And now a reminder of why we're all here. Of course, the Scholars We Fund. Remember, we need £5,000. So please give as generously as you possibly can. Right now, over to them.
We interrupt our programme to bring you this important message.
Hi, I'm Ollie, and I was the first Steve Hewlett Scholar. It's been a whirlwind of a year for me, but the RTS has been there every step of the way. So much so that they've become like my second family. This year I actually got a degree, a 2-1 in broadcast journalism to be precise. The RTS has helped me to get work experience at some amazing places. Good Morning Britain and Studio Lambert's 4 in a Bed. I'm now studying an MA in video production documentary here at the University of Salford, Media City. 3 years ago, this seemed like an impossible dream, but it's proof that anyone from any background with the right support can achieve their dreams.
Take 1. Hi everyone, my name is OT and I'm here in NI. This year I've had the privilege of appearing on BBC multiple times and have developed some fantastic professional connections, even being invited to speak at one of the RTS's trustee meetings. With financial help, I've been able to complete a cinematography certificate on top of my university course. This has increased my filmmaking skills exponentially, which I hope to use in documentary work in the future, on top of the fiction work I've already done across the last year. The RTS and the Steve Hewlett Memorial Fund has also made a big difference in my life during the COVID-19 lockdown by providing an extensive programme of remote training and support. As a young person with a disability from a low socio-economic background, it's amazing to be part of a support network dedicated to making careers in TV and journalism accessible. I can't thank them enough for that.
Hi, my name is Khadija. I'm also known as Aki, and I'm the newest recruit at the RTS. My acceptance at the RTS this year has really allowed me to challenge conditioned beliefs that ethnic minorities like myself will struggle to achieve success in such a competitive industry. I'm really looking forward to all the opportunities this will bring. Work placements, events, masterclasses, and the unique opportunity to meet with experienced individuals in my field who are willing to help me fulfill my aspirations of becoming a skillful journalist. I am so excited and really thankful for this journey to begin.
Hello, and thank you to everyone for watching.
We hope you continue to support the Steve Hewlett Memorial Fund
And the RTS who have helped us too.
And we hope that you will remember
who we are in the future.
Well, someone who's given unstinting support to the fund is Tim Davie. He did so when he was boss of BBC Studios, and he continues to do so now that he's BBC Director General. Tim.
This has been a challenging year for our industry, and it's a very tough time to be starting out. You will have seen the 5 excellent scholars that have been supported by the fund so far. They're studying in Salford, Sheffield, Sussex, Belfast and Cardiff. Scholarships and bursaries matter. Earlier in my life, I really benefited from one. They are a way of bridging some of the gaps in an industry where the playing field still isn't level. Diversity matters. Socio-economic diversity matters. We need UK broadcasting clearly to reflect the audiences it serves, and we aren't there yet. But we can get there, and I am determined to lead the BBC's part in that. You will have listened in these sessions to 2 excellent discussions. You've heard from some great figures in broadcasting, including 2 of my distinguished predecessors as Director General. As an industry, I hope we are all united in investing in the next generation of journalists. This scholarship is one powerful way of doing that. Please support it in whatever way you can. Thank you very much.
You can donate to the Steve Hewlett Memorial Fund by visiting the RTS website at rts.org.uk/Steve Hewlett Fund, or by scanning the QR code shown on screen.
So I kind of think, I met Colonel Davie. I've spent 8-9 weeks in the Maze prison. With Peter, I made a film about Bloody Sunday, which I, to this day, think is one of the best things I've ever done. I think it's one of the best things Peter's ever done. It was about as close to the story of Bloody Sunday, both human story and what happened, as I think anyone's ever got. So I've made films in Africa. I've done loads of things, met loads of people. So I feel as if I've been pretty lucky.
Well, it might have had a little bit to do with your talent. I don't know. Steve, thank you very much. I know I speak for everybody when I say we want to see this film on the Kardashians.
It's good.
Really. So please make it, and thank you so much for everything you've done and are still doing. Thank you very much.